Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie and today's video will be ranking all of my eyeshadow palettes, from what I consider my favorite to what I consider my least favorite. This video was heavily inspired by Kelly Gooch, who did a ranking series on her channel. She started out by ranking her eyeshadow palettes, but she since moved on to rank her blushes, bronzers, and highlights. So I'll have her video of her eyeshadow palette and the ranking series listed down below. Just because I put a eyeshadow palette as my least favorite doesn't mean that I don't like it. I really do like all of the eyeshadow palettes in my collection, and I make sure I'm continually rotating them and getting use out of them. But there's some that I just find I gravitate more than others, and the color scheme just inspires me more, which is a reason that I'd heavily like a palette. So without further ado, if you want to see how I rank my 16 eyeshadow palettes from favorite to least favorite, let's jump right into the video. So number 16 has to be my Morphe 25A palette. I bought this off Haute Look, and although I like it, the color scheme doesn't really inspire me. It's a warm neutral palette, and that's about it. The mattes are nice and they are buildable. They're not really pigmented upon first application, and the shimmers are super creamy and soft, but I find that I can pretty much get this look with any of the palettes in my collection. And I'm not just putting it last because it's Morphe, because I do like the shadows. Actually, this black is super pigmented, but to be honest, when I really want to do an eyeshadow look, this is probably not the palette that I'm thinking of. So there are some swatches of the shimmers in the palette just so you can see how absolutely creamy they are. And they are, but I also find this palette doesn't really hold up long term in my eyes, which is another reason I don't reach for it, especially if I have to wear it on a long term. Number 15 has to go to the Too Faced Natural Eyes palette. I was gifted this by a friend and I do like it. I think the quality is good. It doesn't really smell like chocolate. I don't know if these were supposed to smell like chocolate. And I find that it's a good palette. It is what it says. You get a nice natural everyday eye look. But I find that this can be almost too subtle. I don't think these shadows will last a long time on my lid at all, and they fade during the day. So it's not something I'd wear if I want my eyeshadow to hold up for 8+ hours. It's pretty, but there was a point where I was even thinking about decluttering this to a friend because I just don't reach for it that much. And I'm still thinking about giving it away because I think someone with a smaller collection or who the color scheme fits more would get more use out of this, because I literally have palettes of these exact same shades. So here's a swatch of a few of the shades. This gold shade, Honey Pot, is actually one of my favorite golds. But once again, I find that if I put it on my lid, it's not there after 6 hours. And that's a big deal breaker when it comes to me and eyeshadows. So although I like the palette and you can see that the mattes are nice and pigmented, it's not a staple in my collection, hence why it's ranked number 15. Number 14 has to go to the Lorac Pro 2. I also bought this palette off Haute Look, and I was so excited to try it because there was a point on YouTube where everybody was raving about the Lorac formula. I bought this one because it was the one available, but also it was a little bit more of an interesting color scheme than the Lorac Pro 1. I still do like the color scheme, but I find that the formula isn't one of my favorites. The shimmers are so soft, but sometimes when I want a shimmer, I really want that blinding effect where it looks like you have metal on your lid, and this palette isn't going to provide that. The color scheme is pretty, but I find that it requires a little bit more creativity to work with, and I often have to pull in a secondary palette. But I do like this, and I find that this quad over here, it's a really nice, natural, kind of like rosy, everyday look. I've used like the green shimmer, but once again, it kind of looks like a green matte with like slight hints of shimmer. And if I want a green eye look, I want a full-on, bold green eye look. So although I like this palette, it's not one that I'm reaching for if I want an eyeshadow that can be seen from outer space. So those are the swatches of a few of the shades. And as you can see, this one's a matte and these three are shimmers. But to be honest, can you really tell the difference between the matte and the shimmers besides that beautiful chrome shade? These almost look like mattes, which is my biggest issue with the palette and why it's ranked in the bottom third. Number 13 has to go to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Prism palette. This palette is in my project pan, and I was hoping by putting it in that series, I'd be more inspired to use it. I like this palette. It has good quality, but I find that the quality isn't as comparable to the rest of the Anastasia palettes, and it's something that I've learned by continual use. The shimmers hit hard pan relatively quickly, and I find that these wouldn't be the mattes that I would put in the palette. I do like it. I'm still able to get some beautiful looks out of this, and although it looks kind of bold and intimidating, I am able to wear this palette to work and get nice everyday looks. I'm happy I put it into my project pan because I'm getting continually inspired by it and able to pull from this like purple and this green and this dark purple. And I love this electric green in the inner corner. But as a cohesive palette, it's not something I reach for. It's something that I have to, sit down for a few minutes and stare at it and then be like, what look am I feeling? It has some unique colors, and I really wish Anastasia would put some of these in single shadows because this was a limited edition holiday palette, but it is my least favorite out of all of the Anastasia palettes. So there's a swatch of some of the colors. It has some really pretty duochromes, like this green and this purple is literally one of my favorite Anastasia colors. So although I like the palette, I find that it can be tricky to work with and I would not recommend it for a beginner. Number 13 comes from the Sephora Collection. It's their Overcast filter palette. This is one of the first eyeshadow palettes I ever had in my collection, and I was gifted to it by a friend for my birthday. You can see I got so much use out of this at the time. This shade right here is my everyday contour color, this shade was my everyday contour color, and this shade was like a beautiful shimmery champagne that I put all over my lid and in the inner corner on a daily basis. And it has such a great stable brown and this like neutral, like yellowy color. And this black is one of the most pigmented blacks I've ever seen. But as a whole, this eyeshadow palette scheme isn't really creative, especially now that I've worn down my favorite shade. It has some nice mattes that I'll reach to for this row if I need a cool toned smoky eye. But for the most part, it's not overly impressive. The shimmer formula is nice, and this purple is a shimmer as well as this taupe, but I really don't wear purples and taupes on my eyes, so although this was a cool tone palette, I have other cool tone palettes that I prefer over this one. It is relatively affordable and it's always on sale on the Sephora website, and I do think it's a really good beginner palette because I find that the color scheme is easy to work with because it's all in the same tonal family. But now that I'm more advanced in my eyeshadow and my makeup skills, I want something more advanced that also meets my needs. So that's a swatch of the few of the colors. I don't think how pigmented the black is showing up on camera, but if you ever need a black, I recommend this one. It's in the shade Black Lace, and it's my favorite black eyeshadow in my collection. And I still do reach this palette from time to time, but the color scheme doesn't really get me going. Number 11 goes to the Milani Soft and Sultry palette. Speaking of cool tone palettes, this is the epitome of a cool tone palette. I like it, but I find that another cool tone palette that you'll see ranked higher in my collection gets me more inspired. It's pretty and I like how compact it is, and for the drugstore, this is a great quality eyeshadow palette. I would like some more. The shimmers are nice, but a lot of the shimmers are in these darker tones, and I would have preferred a few like lighter shimmers because that's typically what I wear on my eyes. The black is also really pigmented, but I would like some more cooler tone transition shades because you have this like off-white bone color and this peach, which I don't really gravitate towards, and I can't imagine someone with darker skin really using this. The palette's nice, but part of me wishes I would have gotten one of the other palettes, but I still do get use out of this, and I like this for an everyday smoky, cool toned eye. So there's a swatch of some of the shadows. The shimmers are really creamy and they go on nicely. I tend to not wet my shimmers, so I can't speak to if they're more bang for your buck when they're wet. But the mattes are nice, but this palette, once again, it just doesn't get me inspired. And I think it might be because there's a small selection of colors, but I really wish some of the shimmers were more impactful and lighter and did a little bit more something for me. Palette number 10 is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Norvina palette. You might be surprised to see this ranked so low in my collection considering how much I rave about the Anastasia palettes, but this one I'm torn on. I think this has the most beautiful shimmers in any of the Anastasia palettes, hand down, no question, but the mattes in this palette are my biggest issue. The shade here called Soul is this beautiful periwinkle, but it has a gray undertone, so I find that it never looks good with my eye looks and makes me look almost sickly. There's not enough dark colors to do a smoky eye. There's this one called, which I'm gonna forget, Passion, and then Drama can be used as kind of like a shimmery matte, but I really wish there were more purples considering this was marketed as almost a purple palette. It's nice and I absolutely love the shimmers. The mattes just leave something to be desired. So there's a swatch of some of the shimmers in that shade Soul that I was talking about, and you can really see that gray undertone, and I really wish it was more of a true lavender purple because I feel like that would have been an asset to the palette. But the shimmers, there's no question that these shimmers are to die for. Palette number 9 has to go to the Becca Cosmetics Volcano Goddess palette. When I picked this up at TJ Maxx, I thought this would rank as number 16 because I bought it purely because it was on sale, but the more I use it, the more I fall in love with it. The color scheme kind of looks basic, but these shadows have some of the creamiest formula ever. The fact that this is the blue-purple duochrome really moved the palette up in the ranks for me because it brings a lot of versatility. These shimmers are so soft and they layer really well upon each other, and although this palette has kind of a limited selection of mattes, I find that the shimmer formula can even be used in the crease, which is something I like because it adds versatility to a palette with a limited color selection. I absolutely love this selection and I'm super happy I picked up this palette. It's beautiful and has a nicer range of warm tone and cool tones. So there's a swatch of some of the shimmers and you can really see that blue purple duochrome, and it's absolutely versatile and I love it, especially on top of a light colored base like a concealer. It really brings a whole added element to this palette. Number 8 has to go to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Riviera palette. This is the newest Anastasia Beverly Hills palette and one of the newer palettes in my collection, but I find that every time Seychelles broke. So I just found out the blue in the palette Seychelles has broken and it might take me a minute to recover. But as I was saying, every time I open this palette, I find that I'm inspired to create a new, different, colorful look. I love this in conjunction with some of the other palettes. These purples and the pinks go perfectly with the Norvina palette, which I felt was lacking mattes in this color scheme. These shimmers are so beautiful and they're so unique. The color right here, Mediterranean, is one of my favorite shimmers and reminds me a lot of my favorite shimmer from the Prism palette. I love this palette. I think it's such an asset to the Anastasia Beverly Hills line, and I can't wait to use this more when spring and summer rolls around because I think these beautiful like pinks and purples are gonna be so appropriate just all over the lid with a nice lip gloss. So there's a swatch with a few of the colors and you can see that beautiful shade Mediterranean. It's a little bit more icy and purpley in person than it is on camera because it's showing a lot more like periwinkle, but it's beautiful paired with this color purple too. Palette number 7 is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette. Remember that cool tone palette that I mentioned that gets me more inspired? It's right here. This palette has shimmers to die for. It also has some really staple mattes and then this kind of pop of color that gets me really inspired to use it. I love being able to put one of the shimmers all over the lid and then add the mattes in the crease, and I find that can a really simple wearable look, but this palette can give you the glam of all glams. I like that the shimmers also layer well upon one another so you're able to amp up some of the colors, and I find that it's just a beautiful palette and it makes me want to gravitate towards cool tones more, and I think it really was necessary because a lot of people have an outcry for cool tone palettes. So there's some swatches and you can just see how absolutely foil these shimmers are. They look like metal on your lids and that's really what I'm looking for when I go for a shimmer. Number 6 is the Kathleen Lights X Colourpop Dream Street palette. This palette is the perfect combination of warm tones and cool tones and pops of colors and neutrals. It's an everyday palette and I find that the ColourPop formula is amazing. I love these pretty like rose golds and bronzes, but I also love this blue and this hot pink shadow. I find that every time I reach into this palette, I can get a more and more versatile look, and it's super affordable for the quality that you're getting, and I think ColourPop really is a steal. Their shadow palettes and their pressed shadows are some of the best that I've tried, and they're at such a good price tag that I recommend if you haven't found a ColourPop palette, you should look at their website because they have a ton and they might find a color scheme that appeals to you. I really do like this one because I find that I can take a look from day to night really easily, and I've taken this palette traveling and never found myself searching for other colors. So those are some of the swatches from the Dream Street. You can see how foiled those shimmers are, and that blue is almost a duochrome, and that like hot pink color, that like red pink, it is stunning. I put the shimmers all over the lid and throw a matte on my crease and I'm good to go for the day. Palette number 5 goes to the Juvia's Place Masquerade palette. For a while, I struggled with this palette and not being able to find cohesive looks, but I feel like as my eyeshadow game has improved, my love for this palette has increased. I'm usually able to do a beautiful cut crease where I put the warm tones in the crease and then put one of these shimmers on the lid. If you haven't tried any of Juvia's Place shadows, the shimmers are out of this world. It's also a relatively affordable brand, and because they're owned by a woman of color, a lot of the shadows are super pigmented so you can show up on darker skin tones. This is the Masquerade Mini, so you can see how big the shadow pans. You can only imagine how big the real Masquerade is. But I like this because if I'm looking for a beautiful like jewel tone shimmer, I can always gravitate towards this palette and count on it to look absolutely beautiful. So you can just see those shimmers are so reflective. It has such a pretty jewel tone color range. Like that blue is captivating me on the camera right now. And I love being able to put them all over the lid and being able to incorporate the shimmers with other palettes. And because the bottom half is still warm toned, it still is a half neutral and half wearable palette. So my hand is getting a little bit stained during the process. We only have 4 palettes left to go. Number 4 is the newest palette in my collection, and it is the ColourPop Disney Villains Misunderstood palette. I've mentioned before, but I really wasn't planning on buying this palette until I saw it in person. It is stunning, and it's even more versatile in person and using it on your eyes than it looks in camera. A lot of the shades are duochromes, and I find that having just a matte black with a bunch of these other shades allows it to be very versatile. You have these 2 staple terracotta and like a warm brown matte, and the rest are shimmers except for this white, this black, and this navy. But still, I'm never creating the same eye look when I reach into this. I find that the shimmers, like a lot of the other palettes that I mentioned, layer really well on top of another. One of my favorite eye looks I did was this purple called Forest of Thorns with this pink called Mongrels layered on top, and it created like an icy duochrome purple look, and I love it. I think this is such an interesting palette, and a lot of the shimmers are things that I don't have elsewhere in my collection. So there's a swatch of a few of the shades, and you can even see the reflex of the duochromes, and I love these shimmers. They are so beautiful, and this palette, despite popular opinion, you can totally get multiple full looks with. My third favorite palette might be the most unpopular opinion in all of YouTube. It's the Anastasia Beverly Hills Subculture palette. I didn't have any issues blending this palette. I find that all of my looks look seamless and blended. At least I think they look blended. And this color scheme inspires me so much. I'm never creating the same look when I go into this, and I love the fact that this shade Cube and this shade Electric are eyeshadow toppers, so you can put them on any of the other eyeshadows and it just transforms the look completely. I love the quality, and I like the fact that it has some more unique, colorful, deep mattes, so I'm able to create a complete look, and this palette pairs with the Prism palette so perfectly. It actually helps me gravitate towards the Prism more. If you are interested in picking up the Subculture palette, it is on sale at TJ Maxx and Marshalls, and you might be able to find it in stores. And I really do love this palette. I'm one of the 5 people on earth that does, but I get so inspired by this color scheme, and it always makes me want to try something different. So there's a swatch of a few of the shadows. I don't think this palette is the most beginner friendly. It definitely is more pigmented than some of my other Anastasia palettes, but that's something I knew because I watched a lot of the reviews. So I went into the palette knowing that I should apply with a light hand and take a little extra time blending. And I find that if I do that, I can get a seamless look every time. The shade Cube is like a white to pink, and the shade Electric is one of my favorite eyeshadows of all time. It's like a beige green duochrome, and I would buy 100 Electrics if I could. The number 2 palette in my collection is the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette. This palette is absolutely beautiful. It smells like chocolate, which is an immediate asset because whenever I open it up, I'm immediately inspired to keep it open just so I can smell it. But it has beautiful shimmers, and it also has these 4 staple mattes. It has a light brown, a dark brown, a black, and then this white, so I'm still able to create a complete eye look. These shimmers work so well just applied with your finger all over the lid, and I find that they're so unique, and they actually don't dupe a lot of the other shimmers in my collection. This palette was a great addition to Too Faced and kind of made me more interested in the Too Faced line as a whole. I always wanted the original chocolate bars, but the color scheme was kind of something that I had, and I think this palette is so unique and so beautiful and some of the prettiest and richest shimmers that I own. So there's a swatch of some of the shimmers from the palette, and they're so foiled and beautiful, and just all over the lid. You can even do a one shadow look and blend them into the crease and get out the door, and I find that they work perfectly. So the number 1 palette in my collection has to go to one of the holy grails, original, the Modern Renaissance by Anastasia Beverly Hills. Just looking at the inside of this palette, can you tell how much I love it? This is a palette that whenever I don't know what to do, whenever I feel uninspired, whenever I'm just like, I have 3 minutes to get out the door, I pull this palette out. Every time I use it, I get a flawless application, and I feel like my eyeshadow always looks seamless and beautiful and blended. In fact, when I'm going on vacation later in the year, this is the only palette that I want to bring because I find that it's so effortless to create a beautiful look, and my eyeshadow always looks well blended and put together when I wear this palette. It has these beautiful neutrals, which you can obviously see I've gotten my use out of, but I love some of these darker berry tones. This shade Red Ochre is one of my favorite shades in all of my palettes, and it's such a beautiful red, but it has such a unique brown kind of dirty, rusty undertone. I love adding Love Letter, which is a pink, which to be honest, if you know me, pinks don't work on my eyes, but it's such a unique color that I love to amp it and make like a beautiful, sultry, deep pink look. I don't even know what to say about this palette. It's worth all the hype that it got years ago, and I still use it all the time. And to be honest, I've even thought about repurchasing this palette, and it's not even halfway gone. So this palette gladly takes the cake and #1 in my collection. So those are all the eyeshadow palettes in my collection ranked. What's your favorite eyeshadow palette in your collection? And what's one that's kind of at the bottom of the ranking? I'd love if you let me know down below. Once again, if you want to see any videos using these eyeshadow palettes, please let me know, and I'll have any existing videos using these palettes linked in the description box. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel so you can see new videos every week. Thanks for watching!